But over to you, Sally.
Thank you, everyone. Hello. I'm delighted to be here with you all, virtually at least. And thank you very much for joining today. And thank you very much for taking part in that poll. I shall try to adapt my message today in the light of your responses to that poll, which give me a bit of an idea of where you're all coming from in terms of experience in taking feedback from clients. I'm just going to start to share my screen now. I've just got a few slides for my short talk before we get into the active discussion. So I'm just going to share my screen, and that should, there we are. Hopefully you can see my screen there. So as Patrick has mentioned, I'm very conscious that for some of you attended in March, where you heard from Tim and from Matthew talking about pitching. And so I have designed my talk to be complementary, not to duplicate, hopefully, but to build on some of the ideas. I know Tim quite well, and we agree about many things, but we have a different style. And as Patrick was indicating, my approach is all about listening and understanding the client, forming relationships, a bond, and really getting to understand them. And so the way I'm going to present my sort of knowledge is using qualitative information. So you'll see as we go through, I've got lots of quotes from partners and senior managers in law firms who've told me about their experiences and what they do. And that's my approach, really. I try to bring people's real experience and share that where I've got appropriate permissions, and of course anonymized where it wouldn't be appropriate to share something specific. I'm very interested to see that so many of you do already take feedback after a pitch, and that may even be depending on the systems you're operating in, because the buyer may be required to provide you with some feedback. There are, of course, many different ways of obtaining feedback, but my own personal preference is for really candid discussions where you can really get under the skin of things, really understand, and build for yourself valuable intelligence to help you for next time, win or lose, to help you to be in an even better position for the next time. I'm just going to move my slides on. I was going to begin by saying, what is client listening? It seems you may not need that, because I may be preaching to the converted, but we all have slightly different understandings of what it means. To me, it's quite a broad term, which is just about how you obtain feedback directly from your clients. And it's got two main purposes: to find out how you're performing, and also to understand what are your clients' needs, what are their preferences, what are their plans, what would they like, what do they need, where are their gaps in what they're getting from their providers. And it can be a very powerful tool to gain competitive advantage, particularly can be used in the context of pitching. And there is no one right answer to the best time to do it. It depends a little bit on the nature of your relationships, but it can really be at any time. I'm going to give a few case studies later on of particular client listening exercises I have done with clients, which were very much about winning the next pitch, but took place at different stages in the relationship life cycle. Now, I'm aware that there can be cultural sensitivities, and I know that as a group, this club, you are actually spread across a number of locations around the world, and that the practices in your individual countries may be quite varied in terms of willingness to take feedback formally from clients. I'm often told that the UK is more open to taking feedback than some other jurisdictions. But I've also often been told that with firms that are quite international, as many of you are, and firms that have quite an international client base, as many of you do, the concept of client listening is much more familiar than in countries where perhaps local to local relationships perhaps are less used to the idea of formal feedback. Working with people in different jurisdictions, they've often advised me that it can be helpful to reframe the question in a way that is more fitting with the local cultural context. So, for example, some clients may prefer to be asked about their needs and preferences rather than to be asked for feedback. But in the course of that, you still obtain the feedback. You still obtain that same vital information. Another way of asking it is by actually appealing to the client, asking for their help to make you even better. And people are quite often keen to give advice, to give help. And so these are different ways of approaching exactly the same issue. Again, some people have said to me that in their countries, it might feel out of place to have somebody coming with a notepad or to be taking notes on a computer or a recording device. And funnily enough, although France is just a next door neighbour to the UK, we are culturally quite different. And I've, in conversation with lawyers in France, and I've given the example here of Stéphane Lemarchand from DLA Piper, a partner there. He has said, yes, that's right. In France, we are still resistant to the notion of taking feedback, but instead we arrange informal conversations with exactly the same purpose. But just because they feel informal on the outside, we present them as informal, that doesn't mean you go unprepared for your meeting. So actually, you do your work behind the scenes, thinking about what you really want to get out of the conversation, what you really want to learn. But then you just make it appear very relaxed and friendly, but actually it's a meeting. It's still a meeting with a purpose. So informal does not mean unprepared. As I mentioned, there are many different opportunities to take feedback from clients, and I would be an opportunist and take feedback wherever you can, in as many different ways. But the first one I wanted to mention is straight after a pitch. And I see that actually 80% of you on this call have said that you do already take feedback after a pitch. So I'm preaching to the converted. I have a couple of quotes there from UK-based lawyers at Allen. Anne at Allen & Overy was a client listening manager, Mark O'Connor a partner, where they say how they really feel that post-pitch reviews really can make that difference in your future of working, and that is whether you win or lose. You want to find out why and what will really make the difference for next time. But you can also engage in listening, sometimes even when you know there's going to be a major tender. Ahead of a tender, I'm very keen on listening ahead of a tender, and I'll give you a case study about that a little bit later. You can learn so much before the tender is launched. If you are pitching for business in that very formal sort of situation, you can get very valuable information that gives you competitive advantage if you get in there before the tender is launched. And you can even do that for targets that are not yet current clients. It may be harder to get a foot in the door, but actually if buyers know that they are going to be launching a really important process to choose advisors who are going to be critical to their business, they want those advisors to be as well informed as possible so that the pitches that they sit through are really useful to them. Can't tell you how many times I have heard from buyers how boring it can be to sit through lawyers' pitches where lawyers drone on about themselves and their skills and attributes, but are not really hitting the points that the clients want to hear and not really engaging enough with what with the client, creating a dialogue, and are not targeted enough. And so potential clients can be surprisingly open to having a conversation before a tender is launched, and that is even much more the case with your existing clients. You'll know when they're going to be coming up to renew their panel, and you are able to get in there. First, I'm going to talk about actually mid-panel client listening. So that's where you're already on a panel, but you take an opportunity to check in with your client to see how things are going, to get real-time feedback so that you can apply it before you next have to pitch for a panel position. Or indeed, as many of you I'm sure will recognize, often even when you're on a panel, all that is really giving you is a right to bid for more work within the panel. And many companies, many clients will always ask 2 or 3 panel members to bid for every matter. And so taking some feedback in real time, when there's an opportunity for you to amend your approach, adjust it, fine tune it, can be hugely useful. By the way, in these case studies, although these are real examples, as you can see, they're anonymized. And just for the record, I wanted to mention that the quotes that you can see underneath the case studies, they are very deliberately from different firms, from the case study firms, to preserve the anonymity. Obviously, I had a choice of materials and people I could draw on. And so you can see there that I've quoted Sadie Barron from Reed Smith, who says that winning business starts with listening to clients and exploring their needs. This case study is from a different firm, where they knew that they were going to be regularly having to bid for work from within the panel. They concluded one matter within the panel, and they took that opportunity with my assistants to take some feedback, and we interviewed the clients. And they got all kinds of information that they were able to put into action right away. One of the things, quite often I hear from lawyers, they can be a little bit diffident, a little bit unsure. Is it the right thing to do to bother the client, to be pestering them for more work, to be approaching them? Will the client be sick of them? And in this particular instance, and this is where it's information about this client, to help that firm with this client. But this client said, encourage the firm. Get in front of us as often as possible. We want you to. We want you to be hungry. We want you to be saying, we know you've got some things coming up. We think we're ideally placed to do it. We'd be great to help you. This is why. And so they got that information, which gave them the confidence then for this client to do exactly that. And that put them in a better position for winning work. Similarly, it was clear that with this client, the client was happy to work alongside them to identify, to say, this is where we think that you are a standout firm. This is where we think you've got your unique service proposition. This is where you're better than the others. And having been helped by the client to do that, it was then very easy in the next pitch for them to articulate what made that firm special. And I don't know about you here today, but again, I'm regularly talking to firms, and they quite often go through branding exercises with consultants to help them to understand, where are we special? Where do we stand out? They find it quite hard sometimes from within the firm to articulate what makes us special. And here, the clients were able to do it for them And then, of course, the firm was able to repeat it back to them as part of the pitch, and it positioned them very well. My final slide and my final case study is the pre-renewal pitch. I mentioned earlier that I really think that this is one of the most powerful opportunities to gain real competitive advantage, to gain really relevant intelligence that can really help you with your pitches. And I see from this survey results that about 40% of you do take feedback before a pitch. So you may have good experience of this. In the example I've given here, I just note Robert Chamberlain's words, Evershed Sutherland. He says 99% of our focus is on existing clients because that's where the growth is going to come from. And so, remembering to give that due time and attention to those clients you already have, to nurture them, make sure they don't feel taken for granted, show that you're ready to adapt to what they want. In this case, it was a panel was due to expire. I got involved about 10 months before the panel was due to expire. Being on the panel, the firm was very well aware of the timescales that they were working under. Being a large banking group, they knew that once the panel was announced, once it was launched, they weren't going to be able to ask any questions privately because all the answers would be shared amongst all the bidders. And whilst that would still have been useful, they wouldn't have had any competitive advantage from it. So they wanted to make sure they got in plenty of time, got in early to have those conversations. And again, they brought me along to have those conversations so that the client could speak really candidly about their situation and their views. And a couple of slightly surprising items came out of this conversation. Again, it was specific to this client, but I thought it was really interesting because it was the unexpected. Obviously, many other things came out of the conversation, but one of them was the importance of management information. In a big company or a big bank, they emphasized how lawyers tend to think of it as a bit boring management information. It might be delegated down to a junior team member or a member of the support staff. But if it's done sloppily, if it's done poorly, it really reflects badly on the firm. The general counsel there was able to explain to me that this management information is reviewed at the absolute top board level of the bank, and they rely on that management information being accurate and correct. And so it was a real warning. You've got to get these basics right in order to be seen favorably. Another thing was that at that particular time, the bank was going through a period of cost cutting. And so the in-house team who were going to be making the purchasing decision, they suddenly found they no longer had internal resource that they were used to. They no longer had a communications team, for example. They knew that the law firm was a large law firm with a skilled communications team. They said the kind of value-added services that we would really like, we'd like to be able to use some of your resources, your usually non-fee earning resources. We'd like to be able to tap into that a little bit. We'd like a bit of help with the communications, with press releases and so on. That's what's going to be important for us because that's what we're missing. They would never have guessed that. It wasn't in the RFP anywhere, but those sorts of, it enabled the firm to make offers that were directly tailored to what it was that the client was seeking. I think I'm going to bring my slides to an end here. My purpose has been to give you a flavor of the different types of client listening, when it can be used, how it can be used to help to position you to win the next pitch, whether that's starting right away after your last pitch, or whether that's partway through a relationship or in anticipation of the next one. And I will hand back to Patrick now, and I will be here for the rest of the conversation to join in and answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you.